Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another video for EVE Echoes. With the May balance changes on the horizon and the April test server for those changes coming very soon, I thought I'd sit down and have a chat with you all about the changes that I'd like to see, things that I'm kind of hoping are in that balance change and new stuff that I'd like to see added to the game, just some general adjustments and things like that. So I've sat here with my Silent Rose notebook, I've made a whole ton of little notes here, and we're going to go through those in today's video to basically just discuss those changes in my opinion. Of course, all of this in today's video is going to be my opinion, they're my thoughts, my reasonings. I'd love to hear what you guys think as well. Please do let me know politely down in the comments section below. This is a really big and interesting time for EVE Echoes, and I'd love to get your feedback of what you're looking forward to and what you're hoping is going to be added to the game and what changes you'd like to see too. Though, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it, subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and of course let me know in the comment section down below what ships and topics you'd like to see me cover in future content. Finally, if you do want to be really awesome and help go the extra mile to support this channel, you can do so either by joining us over at Patreon or by indeed checking out our Redbubble merchandise store for cool little notepads like this. You may have noticed my little mask at the beginning of the video, and I was hoping to be wearing one of my t-shirts as well, but unfortunately I completely mistimed this like the absolute noob that I am, and it's currently hanging on the washing line, so hey, yay for that one. Anyway, check out the Redbubble merchandise store, let me know what you think of that one as well. Otherwise, with all that said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the changes I would like to see in the May balance patch. The first topic to talk about, mainly because obviously it's the one that's closest to my heart and probably the one that I'm going to spend most time on, is destroyers. Now, you'll know that I absolutely love my destroyers in EVE Echoes, and I will fly them, and I will argue to the death with anyone who says that destroyers are useless. They're not useless, but I will be the first to admit and agree that they are not where they should be. Now, if we make a quick comparison here to EVE Online, or as quick as Captain Benzie ever makes anything, in EVE Online, you basically have frigates, which are small, fast-moving ships that don't do much in the way of damage. They tend to have very low DPS on account of them only having 2 or 3 high slots that they can fit weaponry into. Then you have cruisers. Cruisers are medium-sized ships. They have a lot higher DPS, but they are obviously a lot larger as well. Now, being larger means they take more hits, but they get to use medium-sized modules to counteract that. They're using medium shield boosters, medium armor repairers, all that kind of thing there, so they are tankier ships. Cruisers are tankier than destroyers, and they do a lot more damage, but they're bigger and slower to compensate. Now, the downside in EVE Online as well, when it comes to medium weaponry can often struggle to hit smaller, faster moving targets, especially in PvE. Now, what about destroyers then? Destroyers kind of fill the gap in the middle. They do similar damage to cruisers, but they are capable of applying that damage much better to the smaller, faster-moving targets. The concept is, if you see a cruiser doing 1100 DPS, just as a random thing here, it's probably not doing that full 1100 to any of the frigates, whereas a destroyer doing 1000 DPS is going to be doing that full 1000 both to frigates and destroyers and to medium and larger targets. So you get that advantage over cruisers, that your weaponry is able to apply its damage better to smaller, faster moving targets. The downside is that you're almost as big as a cruiser in regards to signature radius, but you don't have that tanking capability because you're not able to fit and run those medium armor modules, so like medium armor repairers or medium shield boosters, that kind of thing. So you're not as tanky as a cruiser, but you have very similar damage, and you'll actually do better damage than a cruiser against those smaller targets. Now, in EVE Echoes, that is simply not the case. If you look at the damage between a frigate and a destroyer, there's not that much difference. And then if you look between a destroyer and a cruiser, cruisers tend to do a lot more damage than destroyers, and those cruisers are still capable of doing nearly that full amount of DPS to the smaller, faster moving targets. If you've seen my video on the Stabber Fleet issue, and we'll talk more about that ship in a moment, you'll know that there you have a ship that can quite comfortably take out any frigate or destroyer in the game without really too much of breaking a sweat. Ultimately, medium cannons there are arguably doing too much. The other side of things, though, is just simply that the destroyers aren't doing enough. Whilst I do genuinely believe that medium weapons are tracking a little bit too well on smaller targets, I do also believe that destroyers simply aren't doing enough DPS. If you can compare a tier 7 destroyer to a tier 7 frigate and they're doing comparable DPS, to me that's a problem. And there are two ways that you can fix this. Basically, you could either increase the bonuses that the destroyers get. So, for example, if it gets 8% additional small cannon damage, up that to 12% small cannon damage. That's one way to make destroyers do more damage. On the other hand, you can just give every destroyer from tier 4 upwards an additional high slot. I think a Stabber fleet issue, a Thrasher fleet issue, should have 5 high slots. I think a Coercer Navy issue should have 5 high slots. I think some of the ones further up, like for example the Covert Ops frigate, might even deserve 5 or 6. Perhaps even the Navy issue should have the 6 turrets to give it the additional damage, and then things like the Interdictors and all of that have only 5 slots. Now, I prefer this to just playing with the stats for one simple reason. If you just play with the stats, that's additional free damage to destroyers, and destroyers are already very cheap. Look at the cost of a tier 9 destroyer compared to the cost of a tier 9 cruiser. Then look at the cost of, fittings across the board. Small modules tend to be cheaper than medium modules. It's not always the case. There are obviously fluctuations in the market, but overall, small modules and small ships tend to be cheaper than medium modules and medium ships. And of course, on top of that, destroyer skills require significantly fewer skill points than the equivalent medium skills. If you look at small cannon operation and compare how many skill points that needs to medium cannon operation, for example, then look at destroyer command compared to cruiser command, you'll see there is a massive discrepancy in the amount of skill points that are going to be required to train into destroyers. So what I'm saying here is destroyers are already cheap, and if you're going to increase the damage they do, that's just a free upgrade, and it's going to make destroyers significantly better without any additional player involvement. I think if you give them the additional high slot, however, what you're doing instead there is making destroyers cost marginally more as well. Now, increasing the cost whilst increasing the DPS, to me, feels like a fair trade-off. You're saying you can make these ships more powerful, but you do need to pay a bit more ISK in order to do so, and for me, that would be a much more preferable way of doing it. Although, of course, if you do increase the high slots, you do also need to increase capacitor and power grid accordingly as well, specifically power grid. But capacitor on destroyers is something else to touch on briefly. It's abysmal. If I'm sitting here at 555 destroyer engineering, which I am, there is no reason that the majority of my destroyers should be cap unstable with times like 45 to 50 seconds. It is abysmal how low the capacitor bank on certain destroyers is. If I'm running a Talwar Assault, for example, with 2 of the ballistic control systems, it's just wrong that I can go from 100% down to 17% capacitor by activating both of those modules at the same time. Now look, I don't tend to activate both of those at the same time, but if I do, it certainly shouldn't take off 83% of my capacitor in order to do so. That to me just seems insane. So, in Ultimate their breakdown, give destroyers an additional high slot. This increases their damage. They're already the glass part of glass cannon. They just need the cannon part, the actual damage part. Giving them an additional high slot gives them damage, but also requires players to invest a little more into their destroyers, which gives a nice, it's a buff, but it's a buff that comes with a cost. And I prefer that kind of approach than just, hey, let's make it flat out better. Now, we talked as well about the Stabber Fleet issue a second ago. Now, the Stabber Fleet issue is a very powerful cruiser. It's probably, in my opinion, the most powerful cruiser in the game, as far as, or ship in the game, in fairness. As far as cost to effectiveness ratio goes, the Stabber Fleet issue is right up there. And I'm not calling for nerfs to the Stabber Fleet issue by any account. It's just that the Stabber Fleet issue shows a lot of problems with other ships. Why is the Stabber Fleet issue faster than most frigates and all destroyers? It also does better DPS than any destroyer in the game can currently kick out too. So this means that frigates probably need a little bit more speed, because I think if you start to nerf the speed on cruisers, you're going to come across problems there. This means if you can't nerf the cruiser speed, but they're going too fast compared to other ships, it means you need to boost the other speeds. So I think that frigates and destroyers both need a speed increase. Yes, you heard me, I think frigates need a speed increase, because compared to cruisers, they just don't go that much faster. And if you want destroyers to be faster than cruisers, which they should be, suddenly destroyers going faster than cruisers means that the destroyers are going the same speed as the frigates, which means you need to boost the frigate speed a little bit as well. I'm not talking about massive speed increases here. I'm not saying that I think that the interceptors should move at a speed of 5,000 meters per second on an afterburner. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm just saying that we can't nerf cruiser speed without also nerfing battleship and battlecruiser speed. So instead, why don't we just buff destroyers a little bit so they're faster than cruisers, but then we need to buff some frigates to make them faster than the destroyers. It's kind of a knock-on cascade effect. That, to me, is a key point there. It's both a buff to frigates and to destroyers, and I think destroyers need all the love they can get right now. But okay, I think that kind of covers everything there that I want to talk about for the moment in regards to destroyers and frigates. So let's move on to something completely useless that needs a complete rework. I am of course talking about sensor dampeners. Sensor dampeners as they stand in EVE Echoes are utterly useless with the vague exception of a few drone ships. Like there are times when a drone ship may use sensor dampeners, but even then there's usually better stuff. What a sensor dampener does in EVE Online is it not only increases the time it takes the enemy ship to lock on, it also reduces their lock range. So if you hit people with enough sensor dampeners, they can't lock onto a target that's far enough away. That means that sniper ships, like say a Stabber Sniper or a Tornado 2, suddenly either need to get rid of those annoying little sensor dampener ships, or they need to close their range because they physically can't lock onto targets. They want to shoot at a ship that's 120 kilometers away, but they can only lock onto something if it's within 60 kilometers now because of the sensor dampeners, and that's a really cool bit of interplay. Unfortunately, that's not how it works in EVE Echoes, and the developers have absolutely said they do not want to add locking range into Echoes, and I get that. It's a very complex mechanic, it's going to be fairly difficult to program, and it's one of those things that's quite tricky to understand. So I think with EVE Echoes wanting to simplify and streamline things, I can understand why they don't want to add lock range. This, however, means that currently sensor damps are completely pointless. So my thought here is, why not mix things up completely? If you're already going to change certain things in EVE Echoes, like for example the fact that the Caldari are using guidance disruptors rather than ECM, and the Amar are only going to be using turret disruptions, tracking disruption, why not completely mess this around? Why not give Gallente the guidance disruptors and give Caldari back their ECM? Basically, guidance disruptors, to me, make more sense to be on Gallente. Gallente went to war with the Caldari, Caldari used missiles. Of course the Gallente are going to develop technology to screw with Caldari missiles. That just makes sense to me. I think it's ultimately one of those things that we should have seen that target painters were Amar. I don't get why, and this is coming from EVE Online, I don't get why every sort of nation's E-War seems to purposefully target itself. Caldari are fast at locking on, so their E-War is ECM that stops you locking on. Gallente are very good, again, with like the drones and all this kind of thing, locking onto targets. So they have something that can force you to take longer to lock on and switch targets with drones and things like that. You have things like the Amar, obviously they have tracking disruption and guidance disruption which mess with weapon systems that they use, whereas the Minmatar are small and fast moving, yet their E-War makes smaller targets bigger. To me it makes sense that the Amar would have target painters as something to, you know, help fight the fact that Minmatar ships are small, and the Minmatar ships would have tracking disruptors to mess with Amar lasers so that they can stay and fly under the guns. Gallente would mess with Caldari missiles, and the Caldari would have ECM, the electronic countermeasures, which forces the enemy to unlock, to force the Gallente drone ships to have to lock back on and send their drones at a target again a second time. To me, that makes sense. But even then, I suppose you could just keep things simple and give the electronic countermeasures, ECM, to Gallente. Make it so that sensor dampeners don't just lock on to slow down the lock on, make it so they actually force you to unlock. Like if you hit someone with a sensor dampener for long enough, it actually undoes their lock and makes them reapply it. That's what Caldari ECM does in EVE Online, and I think that would be a good way to fix sensor dampeners in EVE Echoes. Now on the subject of Gallente and drones as well, obviously there is the drone issue that needs fixing. Currently, drones will only fire at targets within drone control range of the command ship. Now, this makes no sense to me. If you think of drone control range as kind of the effective range at which your ship is able to command the drones, kind of like if you're flying a remote control airplane or driving a remote control car, obviously there is a distance with which if you fly that plane too far, it goes out of the range of you being able to actually use the controller, at which point you can sit there and tell it to steer left, but the signal doesn't reach the plane anymore and it just doesn't turn. That, to me, is what drone control range has always been about. Therefore, drone control range is something that should only affect the drones and your ship. It should be something that is only relevant to your ship and your drones. If you have a drone control range of 30 kilometers, your drones should operate only within a 30-kilometer radius. That makes sense, right? So why, when a drone is sitting at 5 kilometers away from me, I have a 30-kilometer drone control range, that drone is 5 kilometers away from me, and it's got a 120-kilometer range on its guns, can it not fire at a ship that is 60 kilometers away? Why does that make sense? Because it doesn't matter that the enemy ship is outside of my drone control range. My drones aren't going that distance. My drones are within the drone control range. Why can they not shoot at the target that is outside of drone control range? Some people have said, oh, that's not a bug, that's intentional. Again, listen to that. Why can a drone that is within my control range not shoot at an enemy target that is outside of my control range when that enemy target is in range of the drone's guns? It's like in America, there is this blew my mind when I saw it. You can go online and hunt remotely. You can do like deer hunting remotely. You pay online and you basically get access to a computerized rifle that has a camera on top of it. And you can aim this and shoot it. Now, what's the point in that if the gun then turned around and said, well, yeah, okay, I can clearly see the deers in my sights, would you like to take the shot? Sorry, you're too far away from the gun. That doesn't make sense. So drones need to be changed to only operate within the command radius of the command ship. Basically, make it so that drones that are in my control range can still shoot at things that are in their range if the enemy ship is outside of control range. It's sentry drones, it's a big problem, and it really needs fixing, because there's no point using sentry drones except on very long drone control range ships like the Dominics, where actually, arguably, medium drones do things better. So, what's the point in sentry drones? Why does my Typhoon, if I'm sitting there with my my Tempest, if I'm doing a Strike Cannon Tempest build or a Strike Cannon Tornado 2 build, I need to sit at 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers, but I've got a drone that can only operate if they're within 30. What's the point? Why do I even have wardens and bouncers and things if I can't shoot them? Now, on the subject of shooting things, let's move then onwards to a couple of changes I'd like to see in regards to tanking. Now, of course, the first of these is shield versus armor. And yes, this is an age-old conversation here. Shield tanking is better than armor tanking. Sorry, it's that simple. Shield tanking has better HP per second. It heals more heal per second than armor tanking does, and it gets higher base resistances, on top of which Armor Logistics is just terrible compared to Shield Logistics, and Armor Guardian is pointless compared to Shield Guardian. So there's a lot of changes here that need to be made. We know that NetEase are looking into this. They've said that this is something they are looking at for the May balance patch, but we need this to not be significant nerfs to Shield. Shield is already in a pretty good place. I don't feel like anyone shield tanking is suddenly able to do content that they shouldn't be able to do otherwise. I don't think shield tanking is breaking the game. It's just that right now, armor tanking simply isn't good enough. It's not up to scratch. If you look at shield tanking and you look at armor tanking, and shield tanking is better, flat out better, on 95% of the ships in the game, and it's comparable on the other 5%, why on earth would you ever go into armor tanking? Just shield tank everything. That's kind of the point that we're at here. So, I think that basically, shield should be kept pretty much the same. Perhaps drop the adaptive invulnerability fields resistances by a small amount, like take it from 36% down to 32%, something like that. But I think that armor should have a higher base resistance. I think every ship should have an increase in its armor resistances. Every single one of them. Not to the shield, just to armor. So if it's 50% electromagnetic resistance on armor, make that 60%. If it's 40% on thermal, make that 50%. Up all of these by 5 to 10 flat % on top. That, to me, goes a long way to fixing armor tanking. Then increase the adaptive armor hardener to the same level as the adaptive invulnerability field. If you need to bring the adaptive invulnerability field down a bit, like I said, from 36 down to 32 or whatever, then bring the armor hardeners up to the exact same level. There is no reason that an adaptive invulnerability field should give you better resistances than an adaptive armor hardener. They should be the same module, but for shield and for armor. That is all that needs to change there. And that then leads into the second part of this discussion, which is damage control units. Damage control units, to me, are underwhelming. If I'm using a Dramiel or something like that gets bonuses to a damage control unit, and I'm choosing not to use it, that kind of insinuates there's a problem here. Damage control units, again, aren't useless. If you can kill an enemy ship in the time that the damage control unit is active, and then that's it, the fight's over, the damage control unit is the better option. So if you've got 13 or 18 seconds to damage control unit, if you can kill an enemy ship in 18 seconds, then the damage control unit is a great option. If the fight goes on longer than the 18 seconds, if you have other ships to fight, or, like, you just don't kill the target in that time, then categorically, an adaptive invulnerability field would have been a better option. And this is mainly because the damage control units just have really low passive resistances. As far as I'm concerned, ultimately, the damage control unit should give a passive resistance boost of about what the adaptive armor hardeners are giving now. I really think a damage control unit should be giving you 20% passive resistance for having it fitted, and that an adaptive armor hardener should be giving you 30% or higher across the board. That means that the adaptive invulnerability field or adaptive armor hardener is going to be better in a long fight, but the damage control unit is not completely useless as soon as you've activated it once and then it's run out. And that is simply the case right now, that if you activate a damage control unit and you are still in combat at the end of its cycling, it would have been better to go for a hardener. Either an adaptive invulnerability field or an adaptive armor hardener. Either of those would have been better. Now, some people have said, could you not just reduce the activation time to a damage control unit? Make it rather than 60 seconds, it activates, it's got a 45-second cooldown or a 30-second cooldown. And yeah, that could also be a way. I just think the passive resistances are a much more powerful way of doing things. Again, in EVE Online, damage control units are passive modules. They just increase your resistances. It's assault damage control units, which can only be fit to assault ships, that ultimately have that activatable ability. So all damage control units in EVE Echoes are essentially assault damage control units from EVE Online. And yeah, you could reduce the amount of time it takes for them to cool down, but again, to me, that's not overly exciting. I wouldn't mind a skill being added to the game that reduced their cooldown, or increased their passive resistances. I think that would be a really cool way of doing it. Nerf it at the boost it, buff it at the cost of having to train into a new skill. That, to me, would make sense. That would be awesome. Add a damage control skill to the game that makes damage control units worthwhile skilling and training into. Or just, flat out increase the base resistances. Now, talking about assault ships with damage control unit activations, I think we need to talk about assault frigates. We've already talked about destroyers, and whilst I think assault destroyers are still in sort of a weird place, they definitely need an additional mid slot. I don't get why a sniper destroyer has 3 mid slots, but a assault destroyer only gets 2. I think adding that third mid slot to the assault destroyers really helps things out. But let's talk about the assault frigates. Now, first things first, the assault frigates themselves, as far as I'm concerned, just do too little compared to interceptors. Once you hit tech level 8, interceptors are just your way forward. They are better DPS, they're more survivable because they're harder to hit, and they get all those abilities to things like tackling and not being affected by interdiction spheres. Assault frigates have none of that. They've got lower DPS, they're bigger, they're slower, they get hit by interdiction spheres. So what's the point in them? What's the point in them once you hit tech 8? This, to me, again, it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. It goes one of two ways. I'm personally of the belief that, actually, interceptors do entirely too much, and that's coming from an interceptor pilot. I think interceptors are supposed to be fast, they're supposed to be hard to hit, and they're supposed to be experts at locking down enemy ships. So things like the interdiction sphere immunity, that's awesome. The speed they move at, that's awesome. I just don't get why they do so much damage. Interceptors should not do as much damage as they do, and assault frigates should do more. I'm an interceptor pilot, and I genuinely think that I do too much damage when I'm flying a Slasher interceptor, or a Condor interceptor, or an H-1 interceptor, especially the H-1 interceptor. That's an insane amount of DPS to have on a Tech 8 frigate. It doesn't need it. There are already so many things that interceptors do. Having them do as much DPS as they do is problematic, and it just pushes out too many of the other ships. So assault frigates, I think, can be improved by nerfing interceptors. That's one way to start things off, and I think either way, the interceptors need those damage nerfs. They do too much. But I think the assault frigates probably also need to be faster. They need more capacitor because they are ridiculously capacitor unstable, and they definitely need more DPS. 100%. Every single one of the assault frigates needs to do more damage, it needs to be faster, and it needs to have a larger capacitor bank. I also think in specific that the Merlin assault needs more to differentiate itself from the Incursus. Obviously, we're talking if armor tanking gets fixed and is comparable to shield tanking, then ultimately the only reason to go for an Incursus or a Merlin is I'm armor tank skilled or I'm shield tank skilled. And that's really kind of dull. In EVE Online, the Incursus assault is based on the Enyo, which is essentially a blaster frigate. It's the tankiest of all the frigates. It gets up into your grill, it hits you with blasters, and it just refuses to die. The Merlin, on the other hand, the Merlin assault is essentially the Harpy, which gets mad bonuses to its railgun ranges, which means it basically becomes a sniper frigate. Like, literally, you can get distances of like 100, 120 kilometers out of the long railguns, out of railguns in EVE Online on the Harpy. So I would love to see the Merlin lose some of its current abilities, but get massive increases to rifled railgun optimal range and accuracy fall off to essentially make it a sniper assault frigate. That to me would be a really cool way of doing things. On top of this, of course, we then need, once we've fixed assault frigates, to add a new wave of them. It still perplexes me a little bit that we didn't get the Rifter assault, the Wolf as it's known in EVE Online. The Rifter is one of the most iconic ships in EVE Online, in the entire EVE universe, and in EVE Echoes there's only one ship and it's absolutely useless once you hit Tech 3, which you do in the first half an hour of playing the game. So ultimately, the Rifter, the most iconic ship, is pointless in EVE Echoes. If you don't see a problem with that, well, I'm not sure what to say. Now, an interesting way to look at this is, again, in EVE Online, there are two assault variants of the frigates for each race. So, for example, the Incursus assault is the Enyo, which uses railguns, and the Ishkur, which uses drones. Then if we look at the Caldari, they're both Merlin hulls. You have the Harpy, which is a long-ranged sniper railgun ship, and you have the Hawk, which uses missiles. For Minmatar, you've got the Rifter variants, the Wolf, which uses cannons and is very tanky, and then you have the Jaguar, which uses missiles. Finally then, for Amar, you have the Punisher Assault, which is the Retributor, and I think the Vengeance. Now, the Retributor is the Assault as we know it. It's a laser ship, and the Vengeance, curiously enough, uses rockets, which obviously isn't a thing in EVE Echoes. Amar ships don't use missiles. But I can see what NetEase were doing here. Basically, they said, right, we need one of these ships to be a missile ship. So, we're going to give that to the Breacher Assault, because the Breacher is already a missile-based hull. People look at a Breacher and they know it uses missiles. So, if we give the assault ship that we want to have missiles to the Breacher, it's a recognisable outline, whereas the Merlin, the people already know the Merlin to be a railgun ship, so we're going to give that railgun. Same with the Ishkur, so the Incursus and the Enyo. It's a railgun ship. It's the Incursus's railguns, so the railgun assault ship needs to be the Incursus. This means that, following this line of thinking, rather than the Ishkur equivalent being an Incursus hull, let's make it a Tristan hull. You get the Tristan Assault. The Tristan Assault is the Galente drone ship for the assault frigates. Then you have the Rifter Assault, which is the Wolf, because that's now cannons and it's recognisable as a Rifter, whereas the missile version, which would have been the Jaguar, is now based on the Breacher hull. This means that we then get a Kestrel Assault that goes alongside it, and that becomes the replacement for the Hawk. Finally, this gets a little bit confusing with Amar, because as I said, the Vengeance uses missiles, which obviously Amar ships don't. This means the Tormentor Assault would probably end up being a drone ship, which is a little bit confusing, but heck, for one ship I think people can get over it. To me, that makes sense. It means that rather than having one hull that does two different things, like the Rifter hull suddenly is missiles or cannons, depending on which way you do it, the Rifter one is clearly cannons. The other Minmatar one that would use missiles, we've changed it to the Breacher hull because it's more identifiable, so then you get that with the Tristan being the drone one rather than it being an Incursus that uses drones, which just looks weird. Anyway, so to me, those are your new assault frigates, and I'd love to see those added. Now, there are two final things to talk about, and both of these kind of twin into each other. So the first one is going to be, having talked about missiles there on the Breacher Assault, missiles versus speed tanking. Currently, compared to turrets, missiles apply too well to fast-moving targets. There, I said it. Look, yes, missiles have lower DPS than other weapon systems, and that's fine, I agree with that. I think missiles are in an okay place at the moment. I just think in regards to PvE, they apply a little bit too well. Ultimately, I don't think this is a nerf we need to do to missiles. I think it's just a case, ultimately, if we talked about earlier giving frigates and destroyers that little bit of extra speed, that might already fix this. But I do think it needs to be looked into whether or not the explosion velocity calculation needs tweaking. Not the explosion radius, the explosion velocity. Basically, this comes down to the fact that I can sit there and I can speed tank Tech 10 anomalies in a Dromiel quite comfortably. I can comfortably do that. I take almost no damage whatsoever. I can do tier 9s, tier 8s, all of these, okay. As soon as I go into a Caldari anomaly, however, speed tanking becomes a problem. If I take, for example, I recently did the Thrasher 2 Interdictor video. The Thrasher 2 Interdictor can speed tank Tech 9 encounters for Galente, Amarr, and Minmatar. It can handle those. Put it into a Tech 9 Caldari encounter, and it's impossible. Take it into a Tech 8 Caldari encounter, and it just about does okay. Now, to me, the fact that changing from turrets to missiles means you have to drop an entire tech level as a speed tank, that kind of seems to be a problem. I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe I'm, being a bit biased on the speed tanking here. I think missiles, obviously, the fact that they never miss their target as long as they're in range, I think that's one of the draws to them. I just think they're doing a little bit too much damage compared to speed tanks. And then finally, talking about encounters, I think we need to have a change to how encounters and anomalies work and operate. I think that ultimately, currently, the fact that encounters are more lucrative than anomalies is a problem. Encounters are completely safe. If you jump into an encounter, no one can get you. You are immune to PvP, and we know that the developers have already said when they add descan, they want to add an alert that lets you know that you've been scanned. So if you're in an encounter, someone scans you, you get the option to warp out early. That makes encounters, again, completely safe. Now, encounters, not only do they reward the bounties for killing the pirate ships, they reward loot that drops off killing those ships, they also give you a reward for completing the entire thing. Whereas anomalies don't. Anomalies only give you the bounties, anomalies only give you the loot. You do not get the end reward, and you are at constant risk of someone jumping into your anomaly and grabbing you for some PvP. They are higher risk, but lower reward, and this has led to the situation where there is a lot less solo PvP than I feel that there should be. And for someone like me, whose solo PvP is one of the main draws to EVE Echoes, that is a big, big problem. Ultimately, I can fly around for 4 or 5 hours and not find a good fight, including going to places like Benzie or Geminate, that places like Fountain and Syndicate that are supposed to be PvP hotspots, even places like Tama. I struggle to find good PvP because everyone's doing encounters. Why would I run anomalies for risk when encounters are better risk whilst also being safer? Like, to me, there's no choice there. If you've got something that's high risk and something that's low risk, then one of those should give you more than the other, and in my opinion, the high risk one should be the one that rewards the most, whereas the low risk is the one that should reward less. That's not the case here in Echoes. The safe encounters give you much more ISK, considerably more ISK, than doing the unsafe anomalies, and that's before we've even talked about the fact that obviously doing encounters can also get you those scrolls which sell on the market for an absolute boatload of ISK as well. So for me, there needs to be a big shift in ISK, and again, with how things are going, I think that should come as a buff to the amount of ISK you earn in nullsec anomalies. I think anomalies should give you a bigger bounty than than encounters should. I think ultimately Condor should be paying you more to kill the pirates out in areas that they don't patrol. You're going out there actually hunting the pirates that Concord themselves aren't able to deal with. That should pay more. They should be paying more bounties for nullsec pirates than they should for highsec encounters. To me, that just it doesn't make sense that Condor are willing to pay as much, if not more, towards making sure that some guy who reneged on a debt pays up. They pay more of bounty on his ship than they do for the actual, Angel Cartel or Blood Raiders living out in nullsec, and that just seems backwards. But anyway, there we go. Those are my thoughts and opinions on all of the things that I would like to see change in the upcoming patch. I know this has been fairly wordy, there's not been much exciting going on screen here. I thought you guys might just like to have a bit of a sort of podcast almost, sit down, listen to me ramble on about things that I want to see change in EVE Echoes. I know a lot of people say that Benzie doesn't ever complain. I like to be a positive force in the community, I like to look at things positively, and if I see a problem, I like to think to myself, right, okay, how can we fix this? What can we do to make this better? Or even before reaching that point, sometimes look at a system and go, right, okay, it sucks that the Valentine's event, if you want to have the keys, you need to pay real-world money for it. But at the same time, developers kind of need to make money, and it is only skins, so you know what? You still get the chances at breaking open those containers, but if you pay a bit, you get more rewards, and they're purely cosmetic rewards. That to me isn't a problem. And I'm happy to sit there and kind of go, you know what, okay, yeah, maybe I didn't get the skins that I wanted, but I get why the system is this way, and it makes sense that it's this way. Sometimes I look at things in EVE Echoes and I go, you know what, actually this is a problem, and I think we do need to sit down and talk about it. But I would rather sit down and talk about it than jump onto Reddit and scream and shout about it and cause a whole bunch of people to quit the game because, oh, insurance is terrible. I think a lot of people are coming around to insurance nowadays, and they're kind of seeing that, okay, this system, it's not perfect, but it is preferable to what we had before. It's heading in the right direction. We know there are changes coming at the end of this month, and there are changes planned for it again further in the year to kind of synchronize things. And please, for the love of God, stop going into my comments and telling me, oh, it should have just been ISK. The system that CCP implemented in EVE Online, CCP themselves have said, we hate this system, it's exploitable, it doesn't do what we want it to, it's terrible. So please, stop asking to have it added to Echoes. That is not the way forward, and it does a lot more damage than I think anyone there is properly actually paying attention to. And I know every time I mention insurance, there are people who get absolutely enraged in my comment section. Good luck. Talk to me politely, I'll engage and talk back. Talk to me rudely, I'll hide you from the channel, and you will just never, ever have your comments viewable by anyone, and you'll just sit there impotently raging in silence in the background. And to me, that's hilarious. Anyway, folks, these are my thoughts, my opinions. It's 2021, and I need to say, this is the internet, my opinions are my own. You may agree, you may disagree. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Is this something you agree with? Do you think that I'm talking utter crap when it comes to some of these changes? Do you think I've missed out on some of the most important ones that you think needs to happen? Let me know this and more in the comment section down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching and listening this one right the way to the very end. As I said, I do know it's a little bit on the lengthy side, so thank you for listening right the way through. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.